Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Welcome to Cineversary, a new podcast that celebrates a milestone anniversary of a cinematic classic. Every month we wish a happy birthday to a different film currently observing a joyous jubilee, everything from a 20th to a 100th anniversary. I'm your host, Erik Martin, creator and moderator of the Cineverse Film Discussion Group that meets weekly in the Chicagoland area. This month we're commemorating the 50th anniversary of an all-time great flick, 2001: A Space Odyssey, directed by Stanley Kubrick. And like any good birthday party, we invite special guests to partake in the commemoration. So today I'll be joined by Barry Vacker. He's professor of media studies at Temple University and author of the book Specter of the Monolith, which was inspired by Kubrick's movie. Together, we'll discuss why 2001: A Space Odyssey is worth celebrating all these years later, its cultural impact and legacy, what we can learn from the picture today, and how it stood the test of time. And now for a bit of context on our film du jour. According to Wikipedia, 2001: A Space Odyssey is a 1968 epic science fiction film produced and directed by Stanley Kubrick. The screenplay was written by Kubrick and Arthur C. Clarke and was inspired by Clarke's short story, The Sentinel. The feature was financed and distributed by Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, but was filmed and edited almost entirely in England. It was originally released April 3, 1968 in the United States. The film received mixed reactions from critics and audiences upon its release, but it garnered a cult following and became the highest-grossing North American film of 1968. Its original budget was around $12 million, but it grossed up to $190 million. It was nominated for 4 Academy Awards, and Kubrick received 1 for his direction of visual effects. Now today, 2001: A Space Odyssey is widely regarded as one of the greatest and most influential films ever made. In 1991, it was deemed culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant by the United States Library of Congress and selected for preservation in the National Film Registry. It currently ranks number 15 on the American Film Institute's list of top 100 movies. Sight and Sound magazine ranked 2001: A Space Odyssey 6th in the top 10 films of all time in its 2002 and its 2012 Critics' Polls editions. It also tied for second place in the magazine's 2012 Directors' Poll. And in 2010, it was named the greatest film of all time by the Moving Arts Film Journal. Let's give a listen to the original trailer for this movie to get us in the mood.
Millions of years ago, before the human race existed, an adventure began. An adventure that ultimately leads man to confront his own destiny in an odyssey of exploration.
Here's what started the whole thing.
Wow.
We thought it might be the upper part of some buried structure, so we excavated out on all sides.
And what's more, it seems to have been deliberately buried.
A shrieking monolith, deliberately buried by an alien intelligence, starts man on a mission 500 million miles into space. With 3 of its 5 crew asleep in hibernation, spacecraft Discovery 1 voyages towards Jupiter. Controlling the mission is a talking computer known as HAL.
Hal, you're the brain and central nervous system of the ship. Does this ever cause you any lack of confidence?
Let me put it this way, Mr. Raymer. No 9000 computer has ever made a mistake or distorted information.
In the first year of the 21st century, there is strange and wondrous beauty, startling experiences that jolt and mystify, and the danger of complete obliteration.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
What are you talking about, Hal?
This mission is too important for me to allow you to jeopardize it.
And now, your journey is just beginning.
And now it's time to play my recorded interview with Professor Barry Vacker, author of the book Specter of the Monolith and professor of media studies at Temple University. Unfortunately, I have to warn you ahead of time that the quality of this recording, it's not exactly ideal. Folks, I'm new to this podcasting game and I'm still getting a few kinks out with microphones and phone interviews and such, but rest assured I will have these problems solved by next month's episode. That being said, I think you'll find the content well outweighs the acoustics, and I appreciate your patience as a listener. So Barry, when and where did you first see 2001?
Well, I'm pretty sure the first time I saw it was actually on the big screen, not in 1968, but sometime in the mid-'80s in Austin, Texas, where I went to grad school at the University of Texas. To say that I was blown away would be an understatement. It was completely over my head, but I knew I'd been visually mesmerized and that the film was saying something really profound about the human condition relating to the vastness of the universe and our destiny within that universe.
Yeah, that sounds like quite an experience. So for me, I was only 11 when I caught it. Now, fortunately, it was an art house cinema, so I got to see it projected on the big screen. But the problem was I was too young and too infatuated with Star Wars to understand or appreciate it. So, but all these years later and several viewings later, I can say with pride that 2001: A Space Odyssey, it's one of my favorite films. And I actually believe it's the second greatest science fiction film of all time, right after my sentimental favorite of Star Wars: A New Hope. So thanks for sharing those memories with me. But Barry, what enthralled you about 2001 and what inspired you to write your book, Specter of the Monolith? Tell us a little bit more about that book.
Well, I think the thing that enthralled me goes back to that first viewing in Austin, Texas, because I remember several of us kind of had a group date. We convened at the theater, and afterwards we walked to a very famous coffee house in Austin called Les Amis, and we sat there until 2 or 3 in the morning talking about the film, and I'd never done that with a film for that long. You walk out of the theater, you talk about a film a bit, and you kind of go on. But we were talking about all the things, the meaning of the monolith, could hell actually exist, what the heck is happening to that astronaut going through that sort of psychedelic space portal, what's the deal with the room at the end. So we were talking about all that stuff, and it stayed with me. And I can't say that I had it all figured out in the beginning, but I've seen it numerous times since then on DVD and on television, et cetera. When I saw the movie Interstellar in the fall of 2014, I knew immediately that Christopher Nolan was referencing some of the subtext and some of the philosophical and existential ideas in 2001. And so I decided I was going to write an essay that compared Interstellar to 2001. And then I kind of realized, hey, 2001's 50th anniversary is coming up in 2018. Maybe I'll make this a larger project into a book that looks at science fiction films and what they're saying about human destiny in the universe, and kind of comparing that to what the Hubble telescope has revealed, what happened with the Apollo moon landings and things like that. And so rather than just kind of have a boring title, I decided to really just reach into 2001. So the title of my book that came out last year is called Specter of the Monolith. And it's about the idea that the monolith is the key visual element that leads us through the plot and the themes of 2001, from the first monolith with the apes to the next monolith on the moon to the next monolith out there near Jupiter to the next monolith in the room at the end near the end of the film. And I think going through those monoliths and what they're suggesting or symbolizing is really at the heart of the meaning of 2001. And I think it's also at the heart of the challenge it poses for humans to construct a philosophy that gives us meaning and purpose in a universe that is vast and awe-inspiring and majestic, and yet we're still physically insignificant. So we're very brainy and very creative, but we're tiny. We're still trying to reconcile all those things, and I think 2001 kind of points us in one way to do that.
Well, that sounds really fascinating. I'm looking forward to checking that book out, so thanks for telling us about it. So we've got the preliminaries out of the way, but I want to now get into some real nitty-gritty Q&A about this month's birthday film. This is, of course, the inaugural podcast for Cineversary. And folks, if you're going to be joining us from month to month, you're going to quickly figure out that I'm going to ask a standard set of questions here every month that will sort of do homage to each of the films celebrating a birthday. The first question I want to ask you, Barry, is why is this movie worth celebrating 50 years later? Why does it still matter, and how has it stood the test of time?
I think it stands the test of time because it's first and foremost a work of art. It's a film, but it's a work of art. And a lot of times it doesn't have to tell us anything. It shows us things. So it's almost like you're going through a film, has a series of artworks with minimal narration on interpreting those visuals and then what they're saying or what they're representing about the reality beyond the movie theater and the reality beyond Earth, in which we've just taken our first steps out and exploring it. So I think 2001 matters because it's a majestic work of art that is inspiring and hopeful in its message.
Yeah, I agree. I think it still matters and resonates because, if I could cite Alfred Hitchcock, it remains one of the truest expressions of pure cinema. Pure cinema, according to his and others' definition, it employs camera movement, editing, music, and sound to tell stories that would be impossible, let's say, in any other medium. Or put another way, it was and is a revolutionary film that took chances. It doesn't follow a traditional narrative construction. There's very little dialogue. Instead, it relies on visual poetry and pure cinema, images married to sound without a reliance on words, narration, or exposition to tell its story. In many ways, 2001 plays like a silent movie. That's part of why it still matters, because the way it tells its story is still so mind-blowingly different from what we're used to. Also, Barry, unlike previous sci-fi movies, the aliens suggested here are never shown, which is probably the right choice, considering no degree of special effects wizardry would have been able to improve upon, your own imagination or sense of wonder over the mysterious sights we see through the eyes of Dave the astronaut, right? What's your thought?
Right. I think it's a brilliant move not to show the aliens, but to show the artifacts they've left humans and left the advanced simians 4 million years ago. So they leave this flat black monolith, and that serves as the visual device to inspire the simians to develop the bone as the first technology, which is hurled into space. And in that incredible jump cut across 4 million years of human and technological evolution, we go from bone to space station. I think Kubrick it's a brilliant move not to show that and put the emphasis on what it might mean, not what they look like. So in this view, the extraterrestrials are obviously benevolent. They're not here to destroy us. They're not here to take us over, not here to rule us, but there to inspire us and see where we might go.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think other ways that the film took chances and it continues to resonate because it's such an avant-garde, risky film that stood the test of time. The other example is there's no proper soundtrack. Instead of an original score, the filmmakers rely primarily on, 2 classical pieces of music that are perfectly matched to the visuals. You've got Thus Spoke Zarathustra and the Blue Danube Waltz. Now, the latter is an ideal choice because, like the space station docking sequence that it orchestrates, it's purposely slow and majestic and rhythmic. The former, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, is an ideal choice as well because it conveys a sense of cold, austere wonder, shock, awe, discovery, even spiritual grandeur.
In essence, I might go a little further. I think that the atmospheric music from Ligeti, when we see the bone drop down, and that music, that atmospheric ambient music that's building up, it's atonal, discordant, that's building up as the apes surround the monolith, and then later scenes in the film. I think that is equally important because it's discordant and strange, not menacing, not threatening, but not super melodic either. So I think the full array from classical music to the more experimental stuff with Ligeti is, again, illustrating the idea that it's a work of art that sort of spans time and spans the genres of filmmaking and music and the visual art of cinema.
Yeah, well put. I agree. So just to kind of continue this train of thought about how it's such a risky avant-garde film, there's not much of a plot, there's not much character development, or for that matter, main characters. When you consider Dave, if he's the lead, played by Keir Dullea, he's introduced halfway into the film, right? And also, this remains, especially in its fourth and final act, one of the most abstract, ambiguous, thought-provoking, and if not downright puzzling films ever made. It forces us to ask deep existential questions and ponder many mysteries. Now, we're going to get into themes in a moment here, so let's shelve that thought for right now. But the film can be endlessly debated about what it means and how it should be deciphered. Do you agree?
Of course, and I think the music at the beginning, Strauss's Thus Spake Zarathustra, is the key to the philosophical meaning of it, because it's a direct connection to Friedrich Nietzsche's book of the same name, and the sort of three-part structure of 2001, in which there are these exponential leaps from the simians to the spacefarers to the Star Child. I think that is visually illustrating the question that Nietzsche posed, and it was simply this. Since humans are the advanced species that evolved from apes, then in the next stage of evolution, what might evolve for humans? What would come next? That's the question that 2001 is pointing toward and implicitly addresses, though not explicitly. And that's the Star Child there at the end of the film.
Just to finish the point about risky filmmaking, interestingly, this is a movie that doesn't try to emotionally manipulate you or telegraph suggested emotions. It's possible to feel pessimistic or optimistic, happy or sad, excited or disgusted during and following the movie. You know, many express feeling an overwhelming sense of awe and astonishment after seeing 2001, and often can't explain why they feel what they feel. I've viewed and discussed this movie a couple of times in my film discussion group, and I've certainly elicited that range of responses in our members. Now, I think this plays into Kubrick's ambition, which was to sidestep intellectual verbalization and, according to what he said in an interview, quote, the viewer's subconscious, tap into the viewer's subconscious. I want to read the rest of the quote from Kubrick. He said, movies present the opportunity to convey complex concepts and abstractions without the traditional reliance on words. I think that 2001, like music, succeeds in short-circuiting the rigid surface cultural blocks that shackle our consciousness to narrowly limited areas of experience, and is able to cut directly through two areas of emotional comprehension. So, Barry, for my next question, I want to ask you, what ways do you think the film was influential on cinema and popular culture?
I think its influence has been felt more over time than it was at that moment. And let me explain. Most people don't realize that NASA shelved the Apollo program early. We pulled the plug on it, and it ended with Apollo 17 in 1972. And the sort of worldwide euphoria and sense of human accomplishment that happened with Apollo, that could have kind of receded into our memories. Meanwhile, there was this film out there called 2001 that was there, and it played through the late 60s and on into the early 70s at various theaters around the world. And then it kind of went away. And then we had, of course, Star Wars in 1977, then the new Star Trek films. And 2001 was kind of below the radar. I clearly remember when the Star Trek films were coming out of the late 70s and early 80s, and nobody was talking about 2001. And that's why when we saw it in the movie theater in Austin that time, I was completely blown away. Because it was so different than Star Wars or Blade Runner or any of the major science fiction films that were happening of that era. So I think its impact has grown over time as we've begun to appreciate what Kubrick and Arthur C. Clarke were showing was the vastness of the universe. I think that the trip through the Stargate, in which we see all these various colors and forms, and then we see things that look like stars and galaxies and networks of expanding universes and possible black holes and different things as we go through the journey with Dave. I think that visually is pointing to exactly what we've discovered with things like the Hubble telescope, the Kepler telescope, and other telescopes, that indeed the universe is vast and majestic, and there's a lot more out there than just going to the moon. And I think that's its long-term legacy, is this avant-garde work of art that visually dramatizes what science has revealed.
Yeah, heady stuff. And I would just add to that, of course, I think inarguably you could say that 2001 was so influential on movies in terms of its visuals, its special effects, which remain breathtaking. So consider that no science fiction film before it looked anything like this. Nothing was this realistic. Nothing depicted actual space travel so accurately. The level of detail and verisimilitude are stunning, even to this day, 50 years later. 2001 set the precedent for science fiction special effects that paved the way for Star Wars just 9 years later.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that if you look at, there was a Disney movie called The Black Hole that came out, I believe, in 79 or 80, and it was the biggest budget Disney film at that time. And it gave a fairly serious treatment of trying to visualize a black hole. But the rest of the plot around the film is pretty weak. But you can see the influence of 2001 there in the way that film is set up. But I think you can just jump ahead to a film most people would know about today that'll be in your listening audience, and that would be Interstellar. And I think in Interstellar, Gargantua, the black hole that Matthew McConaughey goes through, the wormhole that they go through outside Jupiter or Saturn, you can see clearly that Christopher Nolan is referencing some concepts from 2001.
Yeah, those are excellent examples, as you said, the black hole, Interstellar. I want to riff on that and expand that list. Other films influenced by 2001 arguably include The Andromeda Strain, THX 1138, Solaris, Zardoz, we mentioned Star Wars, the film Contact, and Enter the Void.
We jump into the early 70s, and suddenly most of the science fiction films are all very dystopian, like THX 1138 and some of the other ones you mentioned.
Sure, Logan's Run, Soylent Green, you've got the Omega Man. It seems like science fiction and a lot of mainstream movies, for that matter, especially the early 70s, are taking on a more pessimistic worldview, probably in response to a lot of world events, whether it's Vietnam, Watergate, distrust of politicians, etc. So it gets manifested in our science fiction too. So just getting back on point with this question, I want to point out that, of course, 2001 is also amazingly edited. It can boast of the most audacious jump cut ever used in cinema, and that's the edit point between the bone that's thrown into the air, followed by the unexpected shot of a space station moving through space. Do you have any thoughts on the editing of 2001?
It's obviously, it's brilliant, and that jump cut is equally brilliant. It's just awe-inspiring. In fact, earlier this spring, I gave a talk at the University of Colorado. Well, I was mesmerized by how mesmerized the students were about the film, and that the jump cut thing was, for several of them, their favorite scene. They just never seen anything like that. And what was really great about it, Eric, is that they got the meaning of it. It was very clear. Wow, bone, technology, humans. And that visual was just so powerful because it said so much in one instant cut. It was brilliant. Going through the Stargate sequence. And I think all of that is another thing that is just a brilliant series of editing and visuals and the music, the Ligeti's music that's happening at the same time. All of that is brilliantly put together in some of the greatest editing, I think, in film history.
What messages can 2001: A Space Odyssey continue to teach us today? What's the moral to the story here? Now, this is where we explore themes in the film, and being that we're talking about 2001: A Space Odyssey, this could get quite lengthy, so we want to narrow it down to the important themes that we find relevant and that are often discussed, considering, of course, that the list could be infinite. This is a film that kind of defies explanation. Theories abound. It's one that everybody seems to have a different opinion on. I'll start it off with, of course, a major theme being the evolution of man. We see primitive apes that evolve into men and futuristic human beings who've created technology to take them to the stars, and finally the birth of a star child cosmic being following the death of the astronaut. So the evolution of man being kind of a prevailing theme here.
I would agree with that completely. I think you just gave it a beautiful summary right then, so I don't think there's anything I can add to that other than suggesting that in the depiction of the evolution, there are the great leaps, the bone to the space station and the Stargate into the room, and then Dave becomes the Star Child. And I think that's where it has the Nietzschean overtones become very clear, especially considering the music at the beginning and into the film. The other thing that's obvious is that it's also about the evolution of technology. So we have the bone, we have the space station, and of course, most famously, we have the HAL 9000, which is easily, by far, bar none, the most famous computer ever put in a film and the most influential vision of artificial intelligence that's ever been created in any form of art. And so I think the film is suggesting we will develop this technology and it will evolve, and at some point, and I think people might agree or disagree with this, at some point in the film it becomes conscious and it becomes this sort of seemingly a servant of the astronaut. Of course, the HAL decides that he needs to evolve as well. So when the threat to unplug him happens, he takes action and kills the other tries to kill all the remaining astronauts, and he gets all of them except one. That's Dave. So I think it's giving us a warning about that. So in conjunction with the human evolution, I think there's clearly the technological evolution as well.
To me, a major message of 2001 is man's reliance on tools and the dangers this creates. So consider that primitive man's discovery of the bone as a tool leads him to using it to kill. Later, we see the astronaut killing his own creation, HAL, with a simple screwdriver, another tool. Now, I want to kind of regurgitate something that I read originally at Kubrick2001.com. This is an interesting theory that's proposed there, so it's not my own idea. But here it is. Civilized man has lost control of his tools in space. He must learn to walk again, eat baby food, be toilet trained, etc. On Earth, he's a master, but he's just a child in space. So by the film's third of its fourth act, it's suggested that man has outlived his tools, and now his tools are seeking to overtake him, of course, in the form of HAL. But by destroying HAL, man ends his evolutionary alliance with the tool, but he's now alone in space and he's helpless. He's reliant on the same supernatural alien force that inspired and guided him, as embodied in the Monolith, in his primitive ape form. So, again, he's ending his evolutionary alliance with the tool, but he's still reliant on the extraterrestrials.
Well, I think it's an interesting theory. It's well thought out, and I think it's borrowing a little bit from the media theorist Marshall McLuhan, who said that with technologies, we extend ourselves outward. The car is an extension of the foot. Clothing is an extension of the skin. Architecture is an extension of clothing. We extend these technologies out to change the world, to hopefully enhance our survivability in that world, but at the same time, the technologies change us. We adapt to them. So we create an environment of technology, and we spend our time adapting to that technology such that its effects on us become invisible. We're not aware of them until it's pointed out to us, and then many times we might try to deny those effects. And I think that what Kubrick is showing there, that I'll refer to the bone cut, the jump cut with the bone goes up in the air. He extends his arm and throws the bone up into space, and then the next thing we have is a space station. What better example and extension of technology there? But when we get to the space station, we're inside it. We're inside the womb of technology. And the listeners today have spent their entire life within a shell of technology because the entire planet is encircled by satellites. We live inside cities that are electrified and mechanized. So I think, in a way, the space station and the spacecraft in 2001 are nice little icons or microcosms of our complete dependence upon technological civilization. Without the technological civilization, we would be dying off. But at the same time, the technologies are accelerating and advancing so fast that it seems as if we're not in control of them.
Yeah, so another theme worth exploring here is divine intervention. So the original story upon which this film is loosely based was written by Arthur C. Clarke. It's called The Sentinel. The monoliths that appear have been deliberately placed there by an alien intelligence who presumably are trying to inspire life on Earth to take the next step in evolution. So they place another monolith on the moon that once humans reach it, this monolith sends out a signal to a third monolith near Jupiter that's meant to point to a path that man needs to take to evolve even further. So there's a suggestion here that man needs an extra push to progress to the next level of evolution. What are your thoughts about that?
I think we need the inspiration. I think that's the most important thing, is to have the inspiration. And I think I'll go back to the first scene with the monolith and the apes. At first, the apes are terrified, but then they learn to touch it, and eventually there's caressing it. You'll even see one of the apes kissing it. And then as that scene wraps up, they're all around it in reverence of this technology, and it becomes a tool of inspiration, or a technology of inspiration. And I think that that actually leads, that idea in embedded in your question is the other, I think, key narrative arc that is in the film is, what is humanity's destiny in this vastness? Is it Star Trek, in which we go out and we attempt to follow the prime directive and not interfere with other civilizations? We go out in the quest to explore strange new worlds and discover all kinds of new civilizations. Or is it Star Wars, in which we have a continuation of warfare that happens on Earth, and with our technologies we extend it out into space, and we encounter other beings and civilizations that have weapons as well? I think there's sort of those two versions, the Star Trek or the Star Wars, and I think 2001 is probably on the Star Trek side of things, but way beyond that, more philosophically, in what it's trying to suggest with humanity in the vastness of the universe. And from the first time I saw this film until I was writing the book inspired by 2001, and I've screened it in my classes a bunch of times, I've never felt depressed or unhappy or sad with that film. I've always felt completely inspired and like, wow, there is hope amid the vastness. And so I don't think the film is saying we need divine intervention. I think it's saying we need a stimulus of hope and a stimulus to get us going. And in this case, it's not the threat of the Ten Commandments. It's not the threat of the state that's going to force us to do something. It's the inspiration of something as simple and elegant as the black monolith.
So, Barry, another possible moral to the story here is the flawed nature of man. We keep making mistakes and are using our intelligence for destructive purposes. So think about how the bones are used to beat other ape men to death. The supercomputer HAL we created has a programming flaw and an ability to overtake us. The astronauts on the moon touched the monolith in the same way that the ape men touched the monolith, and that maybe suggests that we haven't really evolved or learned much. Man may have conquered his ability to live on planet Earth, but in space, as I said before, he has to learn how to walk, eat, go to the bathroom all over again like an infant. So the flawed nature of man, what would you say about that? Is that something worth delving into as a theme here?
Of course it is. The simian discovers the bone, and he uses it as a tool to kill another animal for food, or to kill a rival in a battle for scarcity of resources. And so we can see the sort of two of the sides of technology as tools that can enhance our ability to survive as a species and individually, and also as a tool to wage warfare on competitors among our species or other species. So certainly the idea that man is flawed, he is yet to rise out or fully develop out of his tribal nature. And I think that's kind of where we are. And I think 2001 assumes, in a way, that we're going to keep moving forward and evolve out of the tribal conditions that we've existed in for hundreds of thousands of years, and which are amplified by the very immediate technologies that are around us, our phones, our laptops, our tablets, which encourage reaction, not reflection. They encourage instantaneousness, not contemplation. And so those very technologies in which all the information and all events and all people are brought right to us on our screens, that is enhancing and retribalizing our planet in a very acute way, and sometimes a very dark and a scary way. So I think 2001 only implicitly addresses that. I think that's on the space station when Haywood Floyd is talking to the scientists that are apparently from the former Soviet Union or possibly the Eastern Bloc or something like that. But it assumes that we've kind of gone forward and we've become a little more peacefully civilized and learning to peacefully coexist. And it's not just the story of Star Wars, which is the continuation of tribal warfare in space.
Barry, this next theme also intrigues me, evolution versus de-evolution. Yes, we see man evolve from primitive animals to sophisticated, intelligent Homo sapiens in 2001, but it's ironic that Hal is shown as being arguably the most human and emotive of all the characters in the film, in contrast to the two astronauts who appear bland and emotionless. I'm not sure if you ever really noticed that. I didn't. On the first few viewings, it passed me by, but others have brought this up, and I wanted to dig a bit deeper. And here's a theory that supports that. The insinuation here is that man has become dehumanized by the technology he has created, and he's in danger of being replaced by that artificial intelligence. So consequently, for man to evolve further, he has to have better command over his tools, or even better, progress beyond his tools by expanding his consciousness and intelligence. If you recall the scene with Poole talking to his parents wishing him happy birthday, Poole seems totally nonplussed. He seems like he could be less enthused as possible. So yet more evidence that it seems like there's almost a dehumanization here when you're too reliant on technology. So Barry, here's another theory. The final evolution is transcendence over mortality. Arguably, the film ends on a positive and an optimistic note by showing that man, despite continuing to make mistakes, like breaking the wine glass and succumbing to decay and death, man can be reborn into a greater, more advanced form. The pessimism here, however, is that man needs outside influence and extraterrestrial or divine help to get there. We are too imperfect, hostile, and over-reliant on our technologies and creations to get there ourselves, is the counter-argument. Barry, what's your take here?
Well, I think the ending of the film is optimistic. Obviously, there are extraterrestrials who guided the process or at least dropped off the monolith at key points to get us moving. And I think if you look at it in the context of not a human-centered point of view, but as humans as one part of a vast universe, you could see the extraterrestrials saying, hey, we're helping one species discover its true place in the universe. And so I think it's hopeful that the extraterrestrial civilization, obviously more advanced than the humans, that it's benevolent, it's peaceful, it seems wise, and it seems like it is willing to share some knowledge, but not force-feed it on us. And I think that gets to that sort of we have the evolution of technology, the evolution of humanity, and we have the flawed mankind or the flawed species that's woven into 2001. But I think at the end of the day, the black monolith is the blank slate upon which we've still yet to write our philosophy for what it means to be in a majestic and awe-inspiring universe in which we're brainy and smart and creative, but we're also insignificant, and as far as we know, we're still alone. The odds are there's going to be life in advanced civilizations out there, but 2001 just leaves it very implicit, and in my view, it's a very hopeful message, because it's a message that's very existentialist. It says ultimately the human species has still got to figure out and take control of its destiny, even though it's had these prompts along the way. And that's, again, why I think the black monolith is the blank slate to write a new philosophy for the human species in this vast and majestic universe. That's what makes 2001, in my view, the single most philosophically important film that's ever made, because it puts us into this larger context about our destiny as a species and as individuals, but not as tribes that are at war with each other. It's up to us to make sense of this world that we've discovered with our technology, and that blank slate is the black monolith, to write that new philosophy based on what we've discovered with all the technologies that we've extended out into the universe, such as the Hubble telescope and others.
Finally, if you're curious what Stanley Kubrick himself said to help interpret the ending of the film, now he wasn't one to come out and kind of extrapolate as far as giving away the store on meanings in his movies, but he did grant a 1969 interview, and I'm going to quote from that. He said, when the surviving astronaut, Bowman, ultimately reaches Jupiter, this alien artifact sweeps him into a force field or stargate that hurls him on a journey through inner and outer space and finally transports him to another part of the galaxy, where he's placed in a human zoo approximating a hospital terrestrial environment drawn out of his own dreams and imagination. In a timeless state, his life passes from middle age to senescence to death. He's reborn, an enhanced being, a star child, an angel, a Superman if you like, and returns to Earth prepared for the next leap forward of man's evolutionary destiny. Quite a mouthful there, but maybe it helps fill in some of the blanks for those who are just completely bewildered at the last act of the movie. I think that gives a little coherence to some people who may still be scratching their heads. On the other hand, it still leaves plenty to the imagination.
My interpretation that I presented in our discussion today is born of many years of thinking about this film. I've seen it, I don't know how many times, probably 20 or 30. What Kubrick says there about the end of the film, he is right. It is what is the next great leap that the human species will make? Will it be evolutionary toward a positive force, or could it be de-evolutionary in the sense of, a nuclear war or something like that, or descent into tribalism or some other kind of doomsday thing, ecological destruction? Or can we move beyond that in an enlightened way? And I think that's where the film gives the greatest hope, because it doesn't tell us exactly what to do, but it says we can be better and we can evolve.
Barry, who do you think this film appealed to initially when it was released in 1968, and who do you think it appeals to today? And if that appeal has changed, what does that say about the film's impact, influence, and legacy?
Based on what I've read, I think the film didn't really appeal to a lot of people in the very beginning because it was abstract. They're thinking they're going to get, Flash Gordon, the 50s character, or another Star Trek episode or something. And it, obviously, as we've discussed, a very different film. So I'm not sure exactly who it appealed to, but then as the film started playing, it was the youth culture of that era that embraced the film. And I'm told, I can't speak for the experience in this, but I'm told that when the Stargate sequence happened, there was a lot of popping of pills to kind of go along with Dave on his journey. And so it had, I think, some hallucinogenic connections with maybe LSD or drug culture or whatever. But I think long term, I think the film has had its greatest appeal for those who see the universe as open to human possibility within that universe. If it was purely apocalyptic or purely a negative take, it wouldn't still have that allure, that wonder, that awe-inspiring sense that it has and that you get on every screening of it. When it starts, I never don't get a little bit of a chill because just the music and the way it's put together. So I think that its ability to inspire wonder and human possibility, what could we do out there that might be great? I think that's why how its legacy's lasted. And I think that's why it'll still be relevant in another 50 years.
Yeah, I would agree to an extent, but today I believe the film is a harder sell. I think younger audiences may be put off by the slow pacing. I can testify that just among my own circle when you try to recommend this to, let's say, some family friends or even younger generations. It's not always everybody's favorite. I think the pacing, the ambiguity, the lack of an action-driven plot, other elements that don't fit as well into our 21st century expectations for feature film entertainment, it makes it a little bit more of a harder sell. So nowadays, I think 2001 appeals more to the curious, the intellectual, the artistic, the scientific, and even the nostalgic. What would you say about that?
Well, I agree with what you just said there about who it appeals to. It agrees to the intellectual, the artists, the philosophers who want to wonder and think about what's out there beyond space, beyond the Earth's surface, beyond the Earth's atmosphere, beyond the solar system, and those who want to think about it, wonder about it, philosophize about it, inquire about it, study it. But I think it's still popular, still relevant for the reasons that you said, the intellectuals, the scientists, the philosophers, the curious. And I think underneath that is the sense of awe and wonder and majesty and hope.
Absolutely. So what elements from this movie have aged well, and what elements have maybe not aged particularly well, in your opinion?
The part that has not aged well is the special effect of the Star Child at the end. When the orb is glowing on the bed there with Dave, I think that special effect just looks very, very dated. On the other hand, the Stargate sequence is fabulous. It still looks spectacular 50 years later. And I would also say that the part about the apes, that opening scene and that bone sequence, is a perfect example to show the addiction to phones we have in our hands and other kinds of things. So I think there's a lot of it that stood up, and obviously Hal as well. It's, like I said earlier, it's the single most influential vision of artificial intelligence that I know of.
I don't have a problem with the Star Child, but I actually had a problem with the Stargate sequence. And I understand. They're limited in terms of how much kaleidoscoping effect they can do with practical effects back then when they don't have the use of digital tools, right? So how can you realistically or even inventively depict going through a wormhole or another dimension or passing through time and space? So they used the tricks that were available at the time. They reversed the polarity on some of the film. They take some obvious landscapes of Earth and they change the tone of the film, or they colorize it or something. They use some animation type style effects, it seems like, but they seem low tech to me today. But again, I'm willing to give it a pass because I understand it was 1968 and this was still mind-blowing for the time. But I do think that modern special effects, of course they can improve tremendously upon those visuals, as demonstrated in a movie like Interstellar. When you think of what they were able to do with what you talked about, traveling through different dimensions and so forth, I think that's an expression of how far our tools and visual technology of filmmaking has come. That being said, the Stargate sequence still remains strange and ethereal enough to inspire awe, at least in me. I would also say that despite the fact that the events and the technologies depicted did not occur by the year 2001, right? So in answer to the question, what elements have aged well and not aged well, okay, it didn't get everything right, but the movie remains powerfully relevant and timely in the deep questions it asks about man and his place in the universe, things we talked about thematically. It remains relevant in terms of the technology he creates. Of course, artificial intelligence, voice-activated AI today is, of course, a huge thing. A few of the gadgets and technologies, while trivial maybe today and look dated, but the way space travel and life for astronauts was depicted in the movie, it doesn't seem to have changed much. Now, I've never been on the International Space Station, but I would venture to say people in NASA and astronauts who view this movie even today would still find a lot of realism in it.
Yeah, I think so. I think, but the fact that we don't have that beautiful space station in the year 2001, I don't think that's an indictment of the film as much as it's an indictment of the humans still on Earth, still duking it out and wasting trillions of dollars on warfare. One thing it didn't get was the miniaturization of the communication technologies, at least in showing the phone call, the video phone call from the space station.
Sure.
When Haywood Floyd calls his daughter, he used a phone booth, and now we just have that in our iPhone, right?
Absolutely.
So it didn't see all that, but I think the spacecraft that you see when Floyd goes from he's on the craft that goes into the space station, that spacecraft is spectacular. I think that 2001 is really one of the great advertisements for space tourism, because we're going to the moon and we're studying it, but it doesn't seem that we're strip mining it for resources or whatever. We're doing other things there, and it seems to be done in a civilized, peaceful, sort of awe-inspiring way. And I think that's very counter to what the dominant narratives are from Elon Musk and others, that we should go to the moon and strip mine it, or go to the Mars and terraform it into a suburb of Earth. And I think 2001, in its sort of projection, it shows reverence for the surface of the moon as something to be visually appreciated and admired, not something merely as a resource to be plundered. And I think that's one of the other sort of visual legacies of the film that I think is counter to the sort of 19th century vision of going into space in the 21st century that dominates.
Now we head into our final question. Do you think this movie will still be widely watched and considered relevant in another 50 years? Why or why not?
I think it will be, to the extent that there's not a whole series of other films that superseded in their greatness or their philosophicalness. 2001 and Interstellar are the two greatest space films ever. I'd put maybe Planet of the Apes, the original, from 1968 as a distant third, but I think those are the two greatest. And it took almost 50 years for a film to rival 2001. That would be Interstellar. So if it's going to take another almost 50 years, I'm probably betting that the film will still be relevant. I think it's going to depend on what we do from here on out in terms of filmmaking and also in terms of what we do and what we discover in space, because you know the next big discovery is going to be life of some type. On some planet, we're going to discover that. And what we do with that knowledge will impact the filmmaking, and it'll impact what humans do back on Earth as well. So the legacy of 2001 is woven in to what follows it in terms of art and cinema, also what follows it in terms of scientific discovery.
For my 2 cents, I believe the answer is yes. This movie will still be widely watched and considered relevant 50 years from now. The film was so far ahead of its time in 1968, and it continues to inspire thought, analysis, and interpretation today. So it's a thinking person's movie, and so long as there are movie watchers who like to be challenged, who like to ask deeper questions about films, there's always going to be an audience for 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yeah, I think for the artist, the thinker, the philosopher, the curious, the explorer, the scientist, 2001 is always going to be there. For pretty much the same reason we might look back at Fritz Lang's Metropolis, which is now 90 years old, and I still scream that in my classes today, and students are still in awe of that film. And even though it's almost 100 years old, it never fails to generate a vibrant discussion, and I have a feeling 2001 will be doing the same thing.
Barry, tell us a little bit more about yourself and your work at Temple University.
Well, I'm an associate professor in the Department of Media Studies in the Klein College of Communication at Temple University in the heart of Philadelphia. I've written a lot of articles about art and science and philosophy. In fact, if anybody is a Black Mirror fan, the hit TV show on Netflix have an anthology coming out called Black Mirror and Critical Media Theory. So, yes, I do all kinds of things. In fact, I'm curating an art exhibit in Toronto next summer that looks at Marshall McLuhan's ideas about media technology, where they might be in the context of the 21st century. And McLuhan was the most famous media theorist.
All right, Barry,
Okay.
I want to thank you again for taking the time to talk with me today.
Erik, I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. Easily the best and most thoughtful conversation I've had about 2001.
Wonderful. Wow, that's high praise coming from a guy who has studied this film extensively, written on it, lectured on it, and of course enjoyed it personally many times over. Barry, thank you so much. You have a wonderful weekend. My thanks again to Professor Barry Vacker for joining me to discuss 2001: A Space Odyssey and celebrate the 50th anniversary of this classic film. That was a lot of fun. Okay, before we wrap up, some show notes. I plan to conclude every episode with a segment that I'm calling Standing Ovations. This is where I give a shout out to a movie, book, website, TV program, podcast, or other work that I think would be of interest to classic film lovers. Now, my first standing ovation goes to a podcast I've enjoyed for several years now. It's called The Classic Film Jerks. This is a monthly show hosted by two guys named Michael DiGiovanni and Andrew Bloom. These are two everyday Joes who watch a highly acclaimed classic movie to see what all the fuss is about, and then they give you their honest opinions about it. I find it's a very entertaining program, and actually for its June episode, it also tackled 2001: A Space Odyssey, so small universe here. For a different perspective on this film, give a listen to the Classic Film Jerks' latest installment, which is available on iTunes, Stitcher, and many other podcast outlets. And full disclosure, I actually appeared as a guest on their May 2018 episode. That's when we discussed the all-time great Western High Noon. A second standing ovation for July. 2001: A Space Odyssey is actually going to be remastered and released on home video again, this time on October 30th in 3 different formats. It will make its debut on 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray. It's going to include a regular Blu-ray and a digital copy. Now you can get all 3 in a deluxe package that includes a collectible booklet and other swag for around $40. Before we wrap up, I also want to encourage you to check out a website. It is cineversegroup.blogspot.com, and that's the portal for my Cineverse film discussion group that I launched 13 years ago, and which continues to meet weekly in the South Suburban Chicagoland area. Cineverse is a democratic film society that watches and then discusses a predetermined movie that our members pick on a rotating basis. And if you go to that website, again, it's cineversegroup.blogspot.com, and Cineverse, by the way, is spelled Cineverse. You can hear podcast recordings of our group discussions, you can read more about the films we study, and there's other goodies to be explored there too. Now, the reason I created Cineverse and this podcast you're listening to is to foster an appreciation for an intelligent dialogue about memorable films. To me, watching a movie, yeah, it's fun, of course, but interpreting it and talking about it and sharing opinions and theories about it, that's even more enjoyable. So I find the pleasure is in digging deeper to learn how and why a film was made, for example, the impact it's had on culture, society, and other movies, why that movie has the power to evoke a strong emotional reaction in each of us, and what it can teach us too. We also have a Cineversary Podcast Facebook page, and that's at facebook.com/CineversaryPodcast. You can go there for more information on current or future episodes. You can post a comment or a suggestion there for a memorable movie about to celebrate a major anniversary. Maybe you think it'd be worthy of an episode on this podcast. And if you're there, please like us on Facebook too. If you'd like to email me a comment or a suggestion, you can get a hold of me, Erik Martin, at cineversegroup@gmail.com. Also, please spread the good word about this show to your kith and kin. And if you like this podcast, leave us good reviews on whatever platform you hear it from, especially iTunes. We really appreciate that. Lastly, plan to tune in next month for our August episode of Cineversary, and that's when we'll celebrate the 25th anniversary of Groundhog Day, originally released in 1993. Before I get out of here, a special thanks to Rocky Martin for performing the outro music to our show, which is a rendition of Waves of the Danube by composer Josef Ivanovic, better known in the 20th century as the Anniversary Waltz. This has been your humble host, Erik Martin, reminding you to butter up that popcorn, live a big screen surround sound life, and cherish those classic movies, because they're not getting older, folks, they're getting better. Thanks again for giving us a listen.